Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So this is the Azure Management Talk series. I'm your host, Samir, and in this series, we are going to talk to different MVPs, Azure MVPs, and community champions, and ask them all about Azure management, basically. So the topic for today is multi-tenant resource management at scale, and it's being presented by Azure MVP Martin Ehrnst. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it then, Martin. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Samir. I can just skip that first slide then. So like Samir said, my name is Martin Ehrnst, and I'm Azure MVP working out of Norway for a company called Vipps. It's a fintech company where we create payment apps and that kind of stuff. And prior to that, I worked 15 years for a company, for a managed service provider, basically. So I have some experience managing multiple tenants and multiple customers, that kind of stuff. So I'm starting off by having some computer problems, so please interrupt me if something fishy is happening on my sharing, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry?
Yes, so far so good. Just
okay, thanks. Since this COVID-19 situation, we were working home, I have this phone behind me, and the funny thing about it is that it's called, like I have on the slide, it's called actually an iPhone with an A and an I, and everyone is asking me what that type of phone is, but it's actually my calling for the doorbell and that kind of stuff. So you don't have to ask me that in the comment or chat section. I already have the answer for you there. So it's an iPhone. Anyway, moving on to Azure Lighthouse. We are focusing on the service provider perspective of Azure Lighthouse. Well, I can just put it out there. If you are managing multiple tenants from an enterprise perspective, all the things that you see here in this demo and throughout the slides are applicable to you as managing the enterprise stuff as well, just to have that out there. So first of all, Azure Lighthouse is a new, or not that new anymore, but it is a separate service provider in ARM. So just like Microsoft Compute is a service provider delivering compute resources, Azure Lighthouse has its own service provider within Azure Resource Manager. And what it does is it allows for managing multiple tenants from one single pane of glass, basically. So you can access, or multiple subscriptions and resources, that's to be correct. So not the tenant itself, but you can manage resources across tenants. That means that service providers and companies that have multiple domains or can centralize their services and protect basically their intellectual property if that's important, because earlier you had to kind of deploy resources directly to your customer's subscription, but now you can create a more of an umbrella service managing your customers. So that is what the service is trying to solve, basically. So what did we do before we had Azure Lighthouse or anything cloud related? Basically, just to have a backdrop, let's just take a look at what we had previously. We had like on-prem Active Directory, or the regular Active Directory, not Azure AD. And to manage multiple customers back then, we used stuff like multiple forests and child domains and organizational units, kind of based upon how we manage the different customers. So you could also have trusts for your customers or through the directories and such. But when we actually moved to Azure, then we had siloed instances of Azure AD and no good connection between, or no good service to connect to the different tenants. So the instances kind of was bound to, the Azure instances was kind of bound to one Azure AD tenant, and what we as managed service providers, or what I used to work for a managed service provider, what we stressed from the beginning was that we have no good service, or whatever we want to call it, to help out customers that need this kind of service. And Microsoft has done multiple things to help out. You have, like, I'm going into it a little bit later, but we had stuff like guest accounts and that kind of thing that helped us in some way, but it still was limited to what we can do, or created an overhead for the customer managing guest accounts and stuff. I'm going to talk about a little bit about that later. So the maze was kind of impossible to solve for many, at least for the smaller service providers. I personally used probably a year of my time creating a service that could manage Azure customers from the kind of like from the beginning. And the manager, because we had a lot of customers when I worked for this company, managing individual tenants or individual customers was not possible at all. So we had to create the custom integrations. And not everyone or every company out there has the ability to become kind of like a service provider partner within the Microsoft ecosystem. So then it becomes even more difficult to have to create an umbrella stack for your management. So what many companies or individual, let's say, consultants did is that the easiest way was to have a dedicated account within each customer. But the good thing about it is that the customer has full control of that account, and if your contract is not, if that contract is terminated, they probably would delete that account. But you had to manage multiple accounts to access multiple customers, right? And the customer had full control of it. It's good and it's bad in some way. So the partner had multiple accounts that they need to manage, and sorry, something happened there. Yeah, and do you see my screen? Sorry.
Yes, Martin.
Yeah, it's all black here, but I can try to continue where I left off. So when the customer is no longer needed your services, they was kind of deleting your account. So dedicated account was good and bad, and guest account was the other thing that we had the possibility of, and it's broadly used still. It's also not only used for managing kind of like customers from a service provider perspective, but it's also what is what you always do when you interact with other customers. So if you are invited to something, collaboration projects through Teams or something, then it will be created a guest account. But that technique can also be used for managing resources in Azure. So the access, by using guest accounts, access to customer was terminated when the consultant leave. At least we hope so. It allowed the service provider or the consultant to create better automation or easier to create automation across his or her customers. One of the problems are that the accounts has access to one account has multiple access to multiple customers. So you need to have some control in place for making sure that you're working on the correct customer. You need to apply additional protection to that account, and maybe you are actually exceeding licenses if that customer requires privileged access management and something like that. I know that there are 1-to-5 ratio on that kind of stuff, but at some point you have license challenges as well. And for those companies lucky enough or have the organization that is eligible for a CSP program, so that is a cloud service provider program from Microsoft, which you need some organizational things in place to be eligible for that program. But then you can access your customers' Azure AD and Office 365 and so on. And you are no longer bound to use dedicated accounts for your customers, and you're no longer bound to use guest accounts in the customers or be invited to your customer's tenant, because there's a link that will allow customers or individuals from one tenant being able to manage the entire tenants from your CSP customer. And there are some quirks around this as well. The users that are given access to your customers through CSP usually have a lot of access. So it's a global administrator, for example, being able to manage Azure AD and manage the resources that the CSP provider actually owner access to all subscriptions that the CSP provider are provisioning. And it also, through the same account, has access to all customers that they have. So if the CSP have access to or have delivering services to 500 different customers, they have access to all of them with the same account. I've used a lot of time creating a custom. This was one of the custom solutions that I created, kind of hardening the CSP admin agent, which is called, creating just-in-time access, more granular group control of the customers and that kind of stuff. But from the service from Microsoft does not have any of this, so you'll be a full-blown administrator. And one thing I forgot to mention on this slide is that you will only can access services that you are providing yourself as a CSP. So if the customer of yours have services or have a pay-as-you-go subscription on a credit card that they want you to manage, you don't automatically have access to that. So you are limited to with your CSP admin agent account, you're limited to accessing subscriptions that you have provided yourself to your customers. So then again, we are back to what we wanted in the first place. We need some kind of centralized automation, and we need some way to provide centralized governance and monitoring, and last but not least, the better access control. So working for a service provider for 14, 15 years, this was all that I worked on. And at some point, Microsoft heard the community and heard the partners, and they created what we now know as Azure Lighthouse. So how does it actually work? As you know, that I said it was a resource provider within ARM. So it's a custom resource provider, and they work from the team work from these principles that you should automate and scale, and you should enable greater visibility both for the provider and also for the customer. And at the bottom there, they have put on, or I have put on, reach new markets. I don't know how exactly the service does that, but it certainly allows you to create services to reach new markets, but it doesn't exactly do it by itself. But that's what the marketing guys at Microsoft says it does. Anyway, so if we look at the automation and scale part, that means through the service provider in ARM, it allows you to implement governance across your customers. So it allows you to manage, for example, Azure policies, and it allows you to take one, let's say, an Azure ARM template and deploy that to all of your customers at once through one connection in Azure Lighthouse. And also, if you are in the monitoring space, you can create a monitoring service, for example, using Azure Monitor or Squared Up, if that was what you use, and then you can look into all your customers from your Lighthouse enabled tenant. That's for automation and scale. Providing greater visibility, then it allows for granular access control. You can use privileged identity management to access your customers, and the customer can actually force the provider to use PIM. So everything is done from the customer tenant. They are providing your access. So it is a delegated process. So the customer will delegate access to a set of service principals or users in the Lighthouse enabled tenant or the MSP tenant or whatever you want to call it. But on the service provider perspective, you can do audit across all your customers. So you can look at the audit logs, you can see who accessed what, and so on. And by having these transparency is that the customer can also see what you have been doing from their side. Last but not least, so reaching new markets, like CSP, and that's an enterprise agreement and pay as you go, since Azure Lighthouse works on the ARM level, so Azure Resource Manager level. It is not bound to the licensing of the subscription itself. It's also a possibility to use Azure Marketplace to create a service and display that managed service in the Azure Marketplace. If I have time, I can show you a little bit later. And of course, you can integrate your CM tools across all your customers as well. Okay, so let's see if I can switch to a demo. I'm going to I'm going to share my whole screen instead. Okay, so what we have here is, first of all, I have two windows open. I can do it like this instead. So if I put my black one on the left side and then the blue one on the right side and see if that makes sense. Then it's the blue one is my Lighthouse enabled tenant, and the black one is my my personal tenant. So two separate tenants, and I have delegated access from my personal tenant to my Lighthouse enabled tenant. And now I'm logged into both of them. So let me just see quickly here. I have some notes, sorry. So if in the MSP tenant, there are some things that we need to pre-provision, or as a prerequisite for the tenant. The thing is that since we have delegated access to persons or groups, we need to create something in our Lighthouse demo tenants to actually have delegation upon. So what I tend to do is that I create groups in my Azure AD, and then I'm going to show you how we are doing that in terms of delegation. So in my Lighthouse tenant, I have created 3 groups that represent some role that I'm going to perform, or tasks that I'm going to perform for my customers. So I have customer automation and policy automation accounts. And then I have like operators for the backup, and I have tier 1 support. Within those groups, I can add individuals, of course, and then I can enable privileged identity management on them as well, so they can actually access that through a limited time or something like that. And the customer can also have that as a mandatory step for your support or something like that. And the reason for creating the groups is that we need to perform a delegation, and the easiest thing that we do is run a deployment at the customer side. So the example that I have here is to delegate an entire subscription, and the template itself, which I have available on GitHub, is calling, or it's setting up this registration definition, which is you can see the Microsoft Managed Service, which is the resource provider that I just said or talked about earlier. And managed services also need it needs the registration definition, and it also needs the registration assignment. And for the assignment part, here we have the groups that I just showed you. So my group, which is called Tier 1 Support, that will have this role definition here. And the backup operators, which is this group here, which is this corresponding group in my Azure tenant, and that will have this role definition, which is the actual backup operator role. And then I have my automation account, which have contributor role, and I also have the policy automation account, which have some extended possibilities to allow for policy management. All this is probably not on scope for this call, but this is really well documented on Microsoft's site as well. But this is the easiest way for you to get your customers onboarded, and in comparison to the marketplace, this allows for you to, for example, create additional groups or adding additional roles for that particular customers instead of going through the process of through the marketplace and create new offers and that kind of stuff. Okay, so once the delegation is actually through, then you need to have something in place. Either you can send this file to your customer, or you can have your own onboarding portal or something like that. But it requires owner permission on the level that you are requesting delegation. So if it's on a subscription level, then you will have to give this template to the owner of the subscription. So, like I said, this black one is my my private tenant, and if I go to service providers, then I can see the delegations that I have performed. And here you can see that I have my MVP sponsorship subscription, which is delegated to this thing here. And let me just show you how that looks, because the name here is, this is a pretty important thing if you're going to look into this, because the name defined in here is actually this one. And the other thing that you need to notice is that this service provider name coming here, that is actually the directory name of the tenant. So if you have like the standard folder or something, that will actually be the name under the service provider here. So you need to change the name of if you have a dedicated tenant for Lighthouse, for example, then you need to change this name. And you can see that I have the role assignments, which is everything in here. But from a customer perspective, I can only see what the role assignments are. I can see the friendly name, and I can see the roles that are given. And I also see the access type. So if it was forced to use privileged identity management or PIM, then it will say that in the access type column here. But if I comparing this to my my service provider or my Lighthouse tenant, I can go to, instead of visiting service providers here, I can go to my customers instead. Then you'll see that I have actually two customers. I have SquareUp and I have Ehrnst, which is my directory name. And I have delegation for 2 subscriptions in total. But looking at the actual delegation here, I can see the groups that are given the access. So instead of seeing the friendly name, I am actually seeing the group name here. Okay, please just interrupt if there are any questions, Samir, on the chat or something.
Yes, there are a couple of questions.
Okay.
Okay, so this one's you know, it's sort of a comment as well as a question.
Yeah.
So I will read the question part of it. So it says that the Lighthouse doesn't help operate all services like Windows Virtual Desktop, Teams, or Exchange. So what's the experience here? Is there a tool that would help manage the accounts for the users and the customer tenants?
Yeah, I'm going back to actually that one, but I can briefly talk about it. Is that Azure Lighthouse is a service that is for Azure. So Office 365, like Teams and Exchange, that is not in the scope for this service. Like I said earlier, it is a resource provider for ARM, which is Azure Resource Manager, and Azure Resource Manager has nothing to do with anything else than handling the resources running in Azure. What I can say is that there are already announced and probably out in private preview by now, it's a similar service for Microsoft 365. So you will have to use two services to control the entire estate. But there are some other quirks with this service, and I'm going back to that, and that is Azure AD and some other stuff. Okay, so we can just when you can interrupt me at any time. Okay, so I will just continue to show if there isn't any other questions at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on.
Yeah, okay. So from a service provider perspective, we can just put this up in full screen instead. So from a service provider's perspective, you can see that I have some different views of the customers. I can see what customers have and what delegation they have. But now I can basically manage all my customers' resources like they was my own. So if I quickly go to subscriptions in this Lighthouse demo tenant, you can see that, okay, it's blurred out, but anyway, so this one here is the squared up demo subscription, and this MVP sponsorship is from my own tenant, and I have a subscription within Lighthouse tenant as well. So by using our regular filtering and management stuff, I can sort of select the customers that I want to work with. So for example, if I don't want to see my own private subscription or the Lighthouse demo subscription, which is if I'm only working on my customers, I can remove that from the filter, and you can see that the portal changes just like it was only my own subscriptions. I also goes for, if I search for like virtual machines, I will see the virtual machines across all my customers, and I can see what subscription they are bound to and that kind of thing. So basically, my point is that whenever you can manage these services that are your customers on this, like the same way that you had managed your own, and that means that you can kind of browse through PowerShell. That you can select your scope or set context like you used to, and then you can deploy, restart, and that kind of stuff for all your resources. But I can just clear this out. But if you look at, I am now connected to the Lighthouse tenant via PowerShell here. So if I actually run get subscription the normal way, after some seconds, hopefully it will list my subscriptions that I have in my Lighthouse tenant. And then you can see that it actually lists out a few more, but that's because I'm also connected to my private tenants with my account. But anyway, here you can see the EA public demo, which is yours, Samir, and you can see my MVP sponsorship twice. And that's why, because I have a token for multiple tenants. But if we look closer, you can see that there are additional properties on the delegated subscriptions. So you can see down here, you can see that it has a home tenant and a managed by tenant. So like you can work with your customers in a known way, you can also identify with what tenants it belongs to when you're working on them. That means you can create, I don't know, CMDB for all your customers across your customers and so on. So anything, most of the things, it's the correct phrase, works as expected. So resource graph is a really good tool. I use that a lot for managing customers, for example. So if I want to find the virtual machines, including their subscription name and tenant ID, then I can do that because this is working on the ARM level. And now I can see that I only have one virtual machine in my MVP sponsorship subscription, and I thought it would be more, but you seem to only have one subscription or one virtual machine in your public demo subscription as well. So this is basically what I want to go through in the first demo, and I was hoping to kind of have some questions where I can show some more, but we can, if you want, I can go back to the slides, and then we can have that all the questions in the end or something like that. I don't know what looks best. So what do you need to think about when you want to use Azure Lighthouse? And after a few years, there are some things that you should be aware of. So, like the one in the comments said, it doesn't work for everything. So, Azure AD and role-based access control, it's some way fishy, and of course it's addressed and acknowledged by Microsoft. But the thing is, what makes Lighthouse and Azure Resource Manager great is what it actually makes it less good as well. So when you're actually in production scenarios as a service provider, you in some cases you will need to interact with the role-based access control or Azure AD for your customer, and then it won't work. And one example could be if your customer have SQL servers that are using Azure Active Directory accounts for their administrators, then you can't be, as an MSP in another tenant, you can't be an Azure administrator on that SQL server, for example, because you're not able to browse the directory of the customer. You will only see your directory when you're trying to do some role-based access control. And other things that you need to do is that you need to choose an onboarding scenario. Are you running with Marketplace? Then you need to figure out what is needed. There are some vetting processes and stuff like that you need to go through, and updating the offerings and so on is not that great experience, to be honest. So I recommend going through the ARM or create some kind of service through that, around that instead. And also, like I showed you in the beginning, that plan your access. So pre-create the groups that you're needed, or have a plan for how you are accessing your customers. On that Azure AD note, it's only the management APIs that are supported, and that means management.azure.com. So Azure Storage Accounts, for example, or Key Vault, which are using their own APIs, then you are limited to what you can do. And then again, like I said, role-based access. It's not you can't use custom role-based or custom roles. So if you thought about creating custom roles for your management scenario, then it won't work. And there's no you won't be identified or notified, when a new customer onboards. So, and that also is the case for the marketplace. It might have been a bit better, but you probably want some notification when if you have an open marketplace offer. You probably will need a good way for picking that up if you don't have everything automated. Okay, so I guess you're on time now, Samir. Just want to summarize within these silos that Microsoft is shaping. Then it's for automation and scale. Then it's like protecting your IP, single sign-on to all your customers, and providing greater visibility is a way for using governance across your policy, like governance using policies and Azure landing zones, and also having the customer in charge of the delegation is something that I know a lot of customers think is good. So reaching new markets, you're not bound to any licensing model. You can use CSP or EA or pay-as-you-go. And with that, I think there is time for questions again. And if there's something here I need to show, then I can jump into the portals again.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. We actually do have a couple of questions.
Cool.
Again, we also have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Maybe let's skip on the comments for now. Let's take the questions first. So the question is, I'm looking for a tool that centrally manages the accounts and their roles and authorizations in the customer tenants. Do you have any ideas?
Oh, okay, so that's Azure AD basically. No, not on the top of my head. I don't. That must be something called. Is it MIM that it's called? That's something I can do to manage Azure AD and stuff. But you need some customization to do that. I think. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that would be active, like regular Active Directory, right? Azure Active Directory.
Or like Azure Active Directory, but the thing is with Azure Lighthouse, I should have probably put that in my slide, but I should put in where the actually resource manager is working. The thing is that Azure Resource Manager doesn't have anything to do with Azure AD. So that's why you cannot use or manage Azure AD through Lighthouse.
Okay.
If I find a drawing about, or I can create a drawing or something like that, and then we can send it out to the attendees or something, or put it in on your blog or something like that later.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And can you get, so basically, does Lighthouse work across different kinds of clouds? So say like a public cloud and a government cloud?
That I don't know. But if you're able to on a technical level, I would say yes, but I don't know if it's blocked by some regulatory stuff. But I'm pretty sure that will that it's probably answered pretty early in the documentation from what I can see. But the thing is that they are also working with different URLs, so I'm not sure. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. And the last one we have here is, are there any issues at scale? That is, if you have 100 of connected tenants, do you see any issues in the portal with so many resources in scope?
No, not really. No more than what you will find if you have 10,000 of resources yourself. It's impossible to use the portal anyway, because it will just be loaded with information. So you will have to create good dashboards like we have here. The ultimate inventory dashboard from Billy York that have management talk next week, I think.
Yeah, just the next one. Yeah.
So it's no more quirky to work with than if you have a lot of resources yourself. It's the browser and the portal that is an issue. Working with PowerShell or working with any other automation tool is not a problem.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's all the questions for now. Thanks, Martin. Can you please jump back on the slides for me?
Yes, of course.
Yep, the next one. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. So thanks everyone for joining again. The recording of the session will be published by next week and will be shared to you all. So we will conclude this webinar today here, but the next webinar, we are going to talk to Billy York, who is now a Microsoft consultant and has been an Azure MVP in the past. It's on next Thursday, and he's going to talk about going zero to hero in Azure Resource Graph. Thanks, Martin, again. Thanks a lot for your time. We appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, again for sharing. I'll see you again next time.